Good afternoon and welcome to the Outdoor Art Club presentation, State of the City, with Mill Valley Mayor John McCauley and City Manager Alan Piombo. We seem to be having some difficulties with some of our viewers, so we'll wait just an extra minute for people to join. Otherwise, we will get started. We are recording this meeting so that everyone will be able to view it and take advantage of the great presentation that you're about to see. My name is Deborah Duck, and I'm working with fellow Zoom team member Lynette Dennison to bring you today's program. For those of you unfamiliar with the Outdoor Art Club, we're a nonprofit charitable organization founded in 1902. Our club engages in civic, cultural, and charitable work in our community. This month, we will host a book drive with the goal of filling the shelves at the newly unified Sausalito Marin City School District. As you know, we are using the Zoom webinar platform today. Please direct all of your questions to Q&A, and we are reserving time at the end of the program, and our speakers would love to answer your questions. At this time, I'd like to welcome Susan Sweet. Susan is a member of the Outdoor Art Club and is the program chair for today's event. Hi, Susan. Thank you for joining us and bringing us today's program, State of the City. Have a great program.
Thank you all for coming. I know you care about Mill Valley, and that's why you're here today. And I'm very pleased to introduce two gentlemen that have been working incredibly hard for the improvement of our community. I would like to first introduce Mayor John McCauley. John and his wife, Cindy, have lived in Mill Valley for the past 37 years, raised their children here, participated in sports, public schools, and he has also served on the city council for the past 8 years, twice as mayor. Before that, he worked in the 6 years in the city planning commission. And in his spare time now, he teaches at the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. He is joined today by our city manager, Alan Piombo, who is, he joined the city of Mill Valley after 28 years with the San Rafael Police Department and 11 months with the Mill Valley Police. Alan served a short term as interim city manager before being selected for the permanent role in January. His skills has shown he has excelled during the pandemic and economic impact to the city. So I welcome both of you to share your presentation with us.
Okay, very good. Alan's going to put the slides up and I'll begin the presentation. So Alan, if you'd move to the next slide. Okay, so this is an overview of what we're going to cover today. I'm not going to read each of these points off to you, but you can see there's quite a variety of things we're going to cover briefly, and then we'll take your questions. And with that, go ahead to the next slide and we'll talk about our first topic. So our first topic is evacuation preparations, something that I've been very involved in for many years, and I'm very happy to discuss what we've been up to. So many years ago, I made a request of our fire chief, Tom Walsh, and I said, Tom, how fast can we evacuate our town in the event of a conflagration? And Tom said, I have no idea. And I thought, that's not the best answer. So we began a journey, and that journey included us contacting many organizations around the country, including FEMA, and we talked to all the various fire organizations. And what we learned was there was no definitive measurement of the speed of evacuation. That got me thinking, and I knew some people down at Google and contacted them. And after a little bit of nudging, was able to find some heavy duty technical research people who were intrigued by the idea, and they began working with us on doing which is really some groundbreaking research. So what they did was they created a map of the town. They put every single house in its geolocation, put us on all our streets, and then put, if you will, cars in each of the homes. And then they ran a simulation to see how quickly they can get us all out of town. When they ran their first simulation, they came to a conclusion that it wasn't very fast. So on their own, they said, how can we make it better? And they concluded that a technique called contraflow would be helpful, where basically you take the area on Blithedale and Roque Moreas and all the way out to the freeway, make that all in the out direction. So we were intrigued by that, and it showed a significant decrease in the amount of time to do the evacuation. So having seen this, if you will, academically, we decided we should actualize it, make it much more formal. So as a result of that first round of work with Google, we went out and we purchased all the signage necessary, and we've got a little trailer that they're in, and we've got instructions for anybody who wants to do that setup for us. We did a similar thing on Miller Avenue. Miller Avenue, as you know, is one lane in the area close to downtown, and it's designed to go back to 2 lanes in the event of an emergency. And we have created all the equipment to make that happen. So that's all that all came as a result of this paper that Google published in academic publication. Then we started thinking more recently, like, okay, we know there's going to be a lot of traffic on Blythedale and on Miller. How can we move cars more quickly, which would allow cars up in the hills to move down, having freed up the blockage down on the flatlands. So we came across a new idea, and that new idea was tested last weekend in a drill. And what we did last Saturday is we made a traffic jam. That was really easy. So we blocked all the traffic on East Blythedale. We let people know this was going to happen. And we let cars line up, and they lined up almost all the way to downtown. Then at exactly 9 o'clock, we released the first car in the queue. We took the cars down Blythedale, made them go right on Blythedale, had them go left on Sycamore, go past the middle school, and then we would have them then exit back around town. We measured all of that, and we came to a very shocking result. The speed with which we were able to clear the cars all the way from downtown to, I like to call it the Girapoli corner, was really fast. It was much faster than we thought it was going to be. And therefore, we have a proof of concept that this idea of intermittently releasing cars into a holding location, which for Miller would be Tam High, and for Blythedale would be Bayfront Park, is a way we can move a lot of cars out of town quickly. Bayfront Park can hold almost 2,000 cars. Tam High can hold about 1,500. There's only 6,000 homes in town in the actual city of Mill Valley. So we can see how significant that technique is. So this is just an example of how we're continually trying to improve evacuation activities, and certainly I'll take questions later. Other things that we've done in terms of evacuation preparation, as you know, we have mailers that we send out to everybody. We identify your community refuge areas. So what a CRA is a place of last resort. So most people will get in their cars and they'll try to get out of town towards the freeways and the like. And I described the way we're going to accelerate that process. If you're really in trouble, you're stuck up in the hills and the fire is around you, what people can do is go to their nearest community refuge area. And that could be on foot, whatever it takes. And we've identified those. Basically, it's areas where there is a lot of concrete and not a lot of flammable material around you. And that creates safety. We also have education and videos. Steps, lanes, and paths are cleared biannually by our Parks and Recs group. So there's a lot of work that's been put into this area of evacuation preparation. Alan, next slide. There you go. Okay, now other elements that are part of our plan to make the city safer deal with the question of vegetation management. So we have a thing called WUI, the Wildlife Urban Interface Fire Area. Basically, it's all the hills around town. We kind of know the places that are at higher risk. City Council passed an ordinance in the last year or so that requires the removal of 10 species of highly flammable vegetation. I always think of it as ABCJ: acacia, bamboo, cypress, and juniper. Those are highly flammable, and there are a few others. We are having those removed. And in addition, we recommended a voluntary removal of vegetation within 3 feet of any structure to create a hardscape non-combustible zone. That engendered quite a lot of controversy in town. We had a pretty full meeting when we brought this item forward. We decided to make it voluntary and not mandatory, although the state has more recently passed their own set of rules, which we're going to have to see how they will interplay over the next few years. They passed a law that said 5 feet. So we'll see how that all comes to pass. There's also an intensive inspection program that is both done by the city, and I'll talk about the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority in a minute. So that's what we're doing in vegetation management. Next slide. Okay, other elements, that's at the house level. At the city level, we have our municipal services tax, which is basically used to improve our roads and to assist us in vegetation. So the city has been doing a lot of work here, clearing city properties. You might have noticed that on East Blythedale, we had some juniper, one of the sins species right on our median, down on Lower Blythedale. So we pulled all that out, like, don't do as we say, do as we do. So we've taken those steps. As I mentioned earlier, we're clearing the SLPs. There are fire breaks around town in significant locations that are designed to stop fire. We have our chipper program where we will come if 3 neighbors get together and do a lot of work. We'll chip your work for you for free. And there's a significant amount of coordination with the Marin Wildfire Protection Authority. That's that new group which just started at the county level, and we're working hand in hand in that area. Next up is emergency communications. So as you know, we have Alert Marin and Nixle. Another couple of things we have in our toolkit, you can see a photo there on the left of what's called a long range acoustic device, an LRAD. So LRADs are quite intriguing. They're designed for emergencies. They have battery backup power and solar. They can communicate by satellite. So if cell phones go down, they can still operate. And what they do is they serve as an alarm. But more interestingly, our fire people and our police people can direct messages specifically over that large PA system saying, go down this street, not that street, and the like. We're only the second city in California which has put the LRAD system in. I'd say it's a work in progress. There's still some parts of town where you can't hear it very well, but this is being worked on and improved. Also, the state has a new high-low siren rule. So if you ever hear that high-low signal on police cars and fire trucks, that means that's a signal to get out of town. There are neighborhood response groups. Other initiatives include our Firewise communities, fire department shared services, and we're currently looking at the question of whether it's wise to put additional density of housing in our fire zone areas. This is in the area of additional dwelling units and the like. So that's still being worked on. Okay, that's enough on fire. Let's move on to a new topic, which is affordable housing. Affordable housing is always been on the city's priority list for some time. We formed a housing advisory committee. I'm the chair of a number of years ago. And from that, there's been some real work. We have a fee now. If you do a remodel in excess of $100,000, there's a 1% fee that is generating some revenues for us. We've used those revenues in a very good way. There's a new home match program out there. And the idea there is we have many people who are living alone in large homes who might be house rich and cash poor, or might just be wanting to have somebody else around. So the home match program finds local people, hopefully generally people who are working in town, and matches them to our other residents. And we've had some success at this already. Maybe a half dozen matches have occurred. So that's a program that we're working on. Another thing that council recently did is we issued a resolution which dealt with the question of local control. And what's going on is the state is, just inundating us with all these new rules, and they're not considering the unique nature of our town and our geography and how it works for us. It's been a one-size-fits-all thing. So while the city has been passionate and worked really hard in the areas of supporting low-income housing and the like, these one-size-fits-all rules are really create some problems for us. One example, for many years, the city has allowed 500 extra square feet for anybody who would put in what's called an additional dwelling unit or a granny unit. And the idea of that at the time was that they were affordable by nature. Back in 20 years ago, when housing was not as expensive as it is now, you could build those units and likely they would be rented at a reasonable rate. As time has gone on, things have become more and more expensive. So what the city of Mill Valley concluded was that if we were going to give somebody 500 square feet for an ADU, we wanted something in return for that. The city wrote an ordinance, took us a year, a bunch of legal process you have to go through. And what it basically said was, we would give you those 500 square feet if you use the ADU for elderly parents, for caregivers, for people who work in town, for your adult children who tend to come back, as we all know. And otherwise, it would be required to be rented at a low income level or sit vacant. We got that all the way to the finish line, and then the state passed a new law that said, you know what? Anybody can build now 800 square feet with no restrictions. Now, if you think about something that's 800 square feet, it's probably going to rent at a market rate, not a low income rate. So all that work we put in was disrupted by a one size fits all state initiative. Therefore, we wrote this local control letter, which went on the record that we as a town are asking the state to slow down and stop anything, any new rules that relate to market rate housing. If you want to encourage low income housing and particularly give us some money, let's go for it. But otherwise, take a break. So that was an initiative that we had signed. Another thing we're working on right now is if you take a look at our properties in town, it's kind of interesting. There's about 6,000 front doorbells in Mill Valley, door houses essentially. Interestingly enough, over 2,000 of those are apartments. We have a lot of apartments in town. They're tucked in all over the place. People don't realize where they all are. One concern we have is that in the event of an earthquake, if those apartments were to collapse, they would not come back as affordable apartments. They'd probably come back as expensive condos. So we are trying to follow in the footpaths of San Francisco, which now has a new law which has been fully implemented and successfully so, that says that if you have an apartment structure that has risk in it because it's got a garage on the first floor that could suffer in an earthquake, that you have to strengthen those homes, and it's called a soft story. And so that's something else we're working on. Now, and as to one specific element of affordable housing, most of you are sure are aware that the city has done an extensive review of all the properties in town that were owned by the city with a hope to find a location or two where we could build some low-income housing. We went through this process very openly in the public. We, in fact, weren't required to do any of this in public, but we chose to. And we finally settled on the public safety building area at 1 Hamilton. It's a large lot. The plan is to build a low-income project there, size not specifically determined yet, but say roughly in the area of 40 homes perhaps. It would, to the extent that the parking lot there would be repurposed, then that's got about 35 parking spots. So we would have to find alternative parking. We're hoping to get maybe 50 in the neighborhood. The status of it right now is we put in our request for qualifications out to the not-for-profit community, and EAH Housing, which is one of the best developers in the state, came forward and has expressed an interest in working with us. So we're negotiating an agreement with them right now. If that agreement does come to pass, EAH's first step will be to reach out to the community and learn what everyone's desires are, and from that, we'll then start the idea of doing some design. There are no designs at this particular moment. So that's that in the housing area. Let's move on to a new topic, which is the housing element. Going back to my earlier conversation about activities which come down from the state, there's a thing called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA as we call it. And it tells you that the city must show that it has zoning that is appropriate, which would allow for a certain number of units to be built. We have a requirement in our current cycle, which is coming to an end now, for 129 units. We've actually met that goal, mostly through ADUs, additional dwelling units. We're only one of 2 cities in Marin that not only designed or had zoning that was appropriate for these number of units, they were all built. Cities can't make people build things, but they certainly can encourage building activity. Our current regional housing needs allocation, RHNA, is kind of staggering. It's gone up to 865, which is 670% of what's in our current cycle. You can see on the slide there what we're talking about. Those number of homes would be more than we have built in Mill Valley in 50 years. So it's quite puzzling and challenging. We've appealed our arena allocation. In fact, we're going to be heard on tomorrow, on Friday. So we'll see where that goes. Virtually every jurisdiction in Marin has seen a similar giant increase in their allocation, and everyone has similarly filed protests with the housing authorities. So stay tuned on how that goes. But the important thing is we have to make sure we have the zoning available to support these units. We can't make people make units, obviously. That's not the way this stuff works. Okay, next slide. Traffic congestion is always a topic of interest in Marin, certainly in Mill Valley. We've had a few things we've been working on lately. One of them goes back quite a ways. This goes back to when Kate Sears was our supervisor. If you look at that Tiburon Boulevard interchange area, where East Blythedale comes together, that is a very complicated bit of real estate in that you've got parts of it owned by the city of Mill Valley, parts of it owned by the city of Tiburon. Belvedere has an interest in it. The county owns part of it, and part of it is owned by Caltrans. So there's all these different jurisdictions within a 2-block area. And that 2-block area is the cause of a massive backup into town. So with Kate's assistance, a few years ago, we all got together and started talking about this. And it was a long, protracted thing. But in the end, something really good came out of it. When Caltrans was designing their new ramp and metering on-ramps up through all of Marin, they agreed on their nickel to make the Tiburon Boulevard northbound on-ramp a wider ramp. It's now 3 lanes wide versus which it would have been 2 lanes. That's very significant because what that allows you to do is take the traffic on the Redwood Frontage Road down there by Safeway and proceed it onto the freeway or towards us or towards Tiburon faster, right? Because there's more room for the cars. That's important because that allows more green time east-west from Mill Valley towards Tiburon and Tiburon towards Mill Valley. That theoretically should help us reduce our traffic jams into town. Just about the time we got this thing wrapped up, of course, COVID came in. All traffic patterns completely changed, and they're still changing now. So I would describe this still as a work in progress. I felt at the time that we didn't really extract all the efficiencies that were possible there. But we're going to stay on this once we get back to whatever our new normal is, and we'll focus on that. If you've been downtown lately, you've seen there's this new downtown project. Pretty cool idea. The idea is to straighten out the Throckmorton wiggle that occurs. This process where Bernard is made into a one-way street and we have parking on both sides of the street is parking neutral. We have the same number of cars under this configuration as we would under the prior one. Everybody is very interested in public reaction to this. I think Alan in a minute will mention how you can give feedback on this topic, but we're going to run this for a couple of weeks and so far so good. It's worked out pretty well, but we'll wait to hear what everyone says. And finally, we do an annual traffic report card. We're probably not going to do it this year because everything's so messed up through COVID, but we have been monitoring and working very hard at improving traffic congestion. And we have seen, slow incremental improvements. So that's the level of matters that I was going to cover in my formal comments. And now we're going to pass it over to Al Piombo, who will cover another group of topics. Alan?
Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I will pick up the remainder of the presentation and bring us to the finish line where we do have time available for Q&A. So the city's work in earnest with diversity, equity, and inclusion started last summer following the tragic death of George Floyd. There was significant community reaction, and our council directed the formation of a DEI task force that was guided internally with a working group that included 2 council members and a couple members of my staff. You can see the timeline for the work that we did to date and some of the items that are ongoing. So the formation of the task force occurred last fall. They conducted their work independently of the city with a facilitator. and produced a report that was presented to council in December 2020. It included 64 plus different recommendations that my staff worked through and formulated a work plan that was presented to council in February of 2021. We took the items and bucketed them into planning and building, which is essentially all the housing items, items related to concerns around policing, recreation and arts, some collaboration with the Chamber of Commerce, and then all other things which fell into the city manager's office, human resources, and the like. So to date, we've presented the housing components to the council. We presented a preliminary look at the policing items. Those are coming back for what we believe is probably a final look at them on October 18th. That'll be followed by a presentation in November on the remaining items that aren't housing and aren't police. Lynn Walsh, our senior management analyst, produces a bi-weekly update that can be found at on our webpage, cityofmillvalley.org/DEI. We've got a bunch of good information there. It shows our progress. It shows what's outstanding. It gives you an idea of what we've updated and what we have coming in the future. So you can see what our goals were, based on a direction from council. They wanted us moving quickly, that we weren't sitting on our hands. We used a GARE model to really start building from the inside out. In the early stages of our DEI efforts, there was a lot of ideas coming from the community, many of which the city doesn't really have direct control over. So we really tried to cipher it down into buckets where the city had direct control or influence, and then other areas such as schools or community partnerships with the chamber and businesses that we could assist but not directly control. So that is how we've been approaching it. Many of the ideas that we looked at, they have to be appropriately scaled for a city our size and a staff our size. Things that San Francisco or Oakland might tackle just may not fit for a city the size of Mill Valley. So can answer more questions on DEI later. All right, so our facilities and infrastructure. You can see there's a number of projects currently going on downtown and a few that have recently completed. So let me see, it looks like I advanced one too far. So as far as recently completed items since the community last heard a state of the city update, some of these go back a little way. Friends Field is one of them, and the wastewater treatment plant rehab project. But last summer we started with the downtown project. The first phase of that was sewer rehabilitation through the downtown. The second phase that just finished about a week or so ago are all the sidewalk and curb bulb outs. We did 16 of those in the downtown area. I'll touch on phase 3 in a moment. We repaved Camino Alto. We just finished redoing the signal at Camino Alto and Sycamore. As I mentioned, the Friends Field renovation. The Scott Highlands community sponsored and paid for a bicycle and pedestrian path improvement through the golf course. That is now completed. The only outstanding item there is adding some additional safety signage. The other thing the city did over the last 2 years was conducted a series of assessments that would give us an idea forward-looking of our facility needs and infrastructure needs. So they're listed here, flood management master plan, some of the solutions there were in the $30 million to $50 million range, probably just untenable for a city to take on. Smaller but still urgent and costly items included the city facilities needs assessments. We looked at City Hall, the library, the public safety building, the golf course clubhouse, et cetera. There's about $10 to $15 million worth of necessary upgrades and improvements there over the next 10 years. We did bridges and culverts assessment. The order of magnitude there is similar as well. And then we did a sewer conditions assessment and built that into a strategic plan and financing moving forward. So what you will see around town, Blythedale phase 1 is underway. That's the portion from the freeway to Camino Alto. Word I got yesterday is we should be getting to the pavement phase of it by mid-November. I think we're looking at November 18th. So it's while it is a complete pain trying to get in and out of town at times, it will be a much freshened up roadway and will include some expanded bicycle lanes. East Blythedale phase 2 and 3, that would be from Camino Alto all the way up to downtown. We're looking at designing the entire stretch of that and then working with council to decide whether we can pay for it and do it all at once, which would be hopefully next summer, or divide it into 2 projects, which would be about half each, and do that over the next 2 years. John mentioned in his presentation the realignment downtown of Throckmorton, and those of you driving up Miller to Sunnyside see the engine number 9 mock-up there. So we're trying the rerouting on those 2 locations at the same time to help our downtown advisory committee decide and inform council as to whether the realignment of those 2 roadways should be included in downtown project phase 3. That would also include a series of sidewalk improvements and curb bulb outs that shorten some of the distances when you're trying to travel from, say, Equator to the depot, or even further across from the depot to where Pete's Coffee is. So your feedback there is welcomed. There are signs all over downtown that have a little QR code that'll take you to a community survey. We also leafleted, downtown, and most of the businesses that you walk into should have a little handout that will have that QR code on it. If not, you could also go to our Public Works website and get a link to provide feedback there. The library is working on an extension of our Wi-Fi, which would be free of charge in the Depot Plaza area. The only holdup there is the chip manufacturing that all the tech companies have experienced since COVID hit. Once those parts and pieces are in, we should have some free Wi-Fi in the downtown area. John already mentioned steps, lanes, and paths. I saw a question come in asking what our annual budget is for steps, lanes, and paths. It's really project dependent. We usually have 2 or 3 in the works at a time. Typically, the funding for the SLPs can range anywhere from $50 to $150,000 per year, depending on the size and scope of the project. What we've been trying to do is not get so elaborate and build concrete steps on every one of them. Those get really expensive, $250,000 to $300,000 a pop if we're doing it with concrete. Hugh Kuhn and his SLP aficionados do a lot of work in conjunction with our public works crews. So we've really been able to get more bang for the buck and are typically doing these for anywhere from $50,000 to $75,000 a piece. City Council adopted our ADA transition plan, which is ongoing work around town. The curb and bulb out improvements are an important piece of that. It also identifies access to each of our city facilities that need to be addressed. And as I mentioned, we did a sewer needs analysis. We continue with our annual sewer rehabilitation. Downtown Phase 1 was an example of that. And then our annual pavement projects, which we did cut back slightly due to the fiscal impact of COVID, but we hope to get that ramped up and back to pre-COVID conditions, especially once we get East Blythefield funded and approved. All right, moving on. COVID. Lots to say here, I suppose. When I took the helm on an interim basis, things were looking fairly rosy in the city of Mill Valley. The budget at the time was already programmed. All I had to do was pilot the ship and keep it pointed in the right direction. And 6 weeks into my interim stint, COVID hit in full force, and we immediately started recognizing the impacts. Businesses downtown shuttering, our own operations in terms of recreation programs, library, et cetera. We just couldn't deliver, which impacted our bottom line. As the slide says there, we had to pivot, and then every 2 weeks as the health orders were changed, we'd have to pivot, and pivot again. I can't say enough about our staff, their resilience, and their ability to adapt to rules that were changing literally every week. With direction from council and just seeing our operational needs and what we could and couldn't deliver, the most significant savings came as a result of laying off or not utilizing part-time staff. Most of those folks were people associated with programs that we just couldn't or wouldn't be allowed to deliver through recreation and library. One of the interesting things that we saw was over a 50% uptick in our planning and building efforts. People were sitting at home and either admiring wine cellars they could put in, additions, ADUs, et cetera. So while we were making cuts on one side of the house, we were double timing it in planning and building. Hit all-time highs this past year on monthly permits issued. So it really stretched the staff where we couldn't afford to add more bodies, but the workload was coming in at a rate that we hadn't seen previously. Plenty of public meetings. Council hosted a series of budget meetings. Every time there was a COVID health order update, we would broadcast those out on our normal channels, MV Connect being one of the primary sources for our community information. Just continuing regarding city finances, we've seen a fairly robust recovery, at least locally for Mill Valley. 55% to 60% of our budget, it comes from property taxes, which makes us fairly stable. Our biggest hits were in sales tax and the TOT tax that comes with short-term rentals and the hotels. For a good period of time, people were not driving, so we saw a little bit of a loss in the sales tax. That's the add on top of your gas purchases. With that, however, we did receive our American Rescue Plan Act money. The city of Mill Valley has $3.4 million coming from the feds. That's in 2 payments. We received $1.7 million of that last month, and around this time next year, we will get the second payment. We also did some debt refinancing on a sewer bond that we had and a bond that we have down on the community center. The existing rates, the existing very low rates, allowed us to restructure those debts. The sewer one, we just did basically a rate and term, didn't add any additional money into that one. But on the community center, it allowed us to borrow an additional $3.8 million and still lower the payment. It pushed out the term a little bit, but council has its eyes on those 2 buckets of money to be able to complete all of East Blythedale and the items we discussed around the downtown project. Additionally, we've looked at additional collaboration between, library, arts, and recreation, seeing where we can offer programs that complement and supplement each other, and reducing some of the overlap out of 2 of our noteworthy departments. We're in the midst of a shared services agreement with the Southern Rim Fire District, which is saving us some money. Looking forward and just trying to get our own house in order. We've looked at succession planning and making sure the top, our department heads and senior managers, that there's a plan in place to develop the people that are coming up through the organization behind us, so that we can continue to deliver a high level of service with highly qualified employees. Council approved a 5-year plan to upgrade our information technology. That is stem to stern, starting with servers, phone system, new computers. A side project included in that was a new website that we just launched Tuesday morning. So if you haven't been to cityofmillvalley.org, please check it out. And then I also, over the summer, commissioned a compensation and classification study. So it's been a little bit of time since we looked at our alignment internally, how we compensate people, how certain classifications are compared against each other. And we also went out to market to see what the regional market is for many of our positions. We benchmark those and are working with council to make sure that we're appropriately compensating our folks and don't wind up in a recruitment and retention situation, but not also overcompensating and costing us money that could be allocated for other projects. All right, community engagement. As many of you probably know, we have MV Connect, which is our electronic newsletter that goes out bi-weekly. I think we have upwards of 16,000 subscribers, which is great for a community, a city that only has 14,000 residents. So clearly there's people outside the city limits that subscribe to our news. So I just mentioned a new city website that has all of our city services, agendas, events. It's broken down by department. The new staff directory and org charts are on there. Please check it out. Give us feedback on it, what you'd like to see, on the main pages. That's always helpful. And then, of course, you can subscribe to our Twitter feeds, Facebook, Nextdoor. Mill Valley is, my understanding, is where Nextdoor originated. The person that created it lives here in town. And there is robust activity on Nextdoor. Sometimes not always the whole truth, but you can always reach out to us. If we don't monitor Nextdoor, it's not what it was built for. The founder will even tell you that. But if you see a thread where there might be some clarification needed, by all means, reach out to either myself at city manager at citymillvalley.org, or the appropriate department who might be able to have a handle on whatever issues gain traction on Nextdoor. Instagram, YouTube, and then some of our departments have their own pages on Facebook, Nextdoor, and YouTube as well. And lastly, let's see, I think it just went backwards. We created a series of new employee-driven committees in town. 2 of them that I want to speak to are communications and community engagement committees. What we're trying to do is just improve our outreach and interaction with the community, and not do it in the different silos that sometimes occur. For instance, recreation, may do a trunk or treat. That's something where we can get broader buy-in and participation from all of our city departments, and get our employees out there in front of the community we serve, so you can see the good folks that are out there providing service to y'all. So that is the conclusion of our slideshow and presentation. I think we're at the Q&A part. John wants to come back in.
And I'd
Hello.
like to say thank you so much for presenting a very inclusive program. You've covered a lot of information, and we do have several questions. Is John back on?
I'm right here.
Great, great. So I'm just going to kind of go through a few. You kind of touched on them a little. When do you anticipate the library and the community center being fully operational?
Part of that is a subject of what the county allows us with its health department, but maybe Alan, you can respond on that a little further.
Yeah, so mostly in recreation, the impediments to a full restoration of programs and services is exactly that, is the county health order. In terms of the library, we have fully funded the library to pre-COVID levels. The issue is getting staff back on board. We lost 2 supervising librarian positions and a couple program coordinators during the pandemic. So you can't drive programs without people to create them and deliver them. So that's really the holdup at this point.
Okay, and earlier, John, you were talking about the traffic models and you mentioned the 6,000 keys in Mill Valley. Did that include the Marin County areas like Homestead and Tam Valley?
Yeah, that's a really good question. 6,000 doors. Basically, when Google ran this material, they well understand that fire crosses city barriers. So they ran the whole area inclusive of county elements also. So whether you're in the city or in the county, you were included in the model if the expectation was that you would exit to the freeway either through Tam Junction or through Blacktail.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. I mean, it's never been done before. It was groundbreaking, and I just feel blessed that Google was willing to spend so much effort on this topic.
That's great. A couple of questions about fire. One person's asking, is there anything the city can do about these escalating insurance policies due to fire hazards?
Well, as somebody who's having difficulty getting insurance myself, I'm very empathetic to that question. I can tell you that the fire department is willing to go out to your house and do an inspection and share those inspection results with the underwriters, with the insurance companies. And I know in a number of cases that's been helpful to retain a policy that was previously potentially to be canceled. I think you just you contact the fire department and they can do that for you. Anything to add, Alan?
Yeah, we also have our Defensible Space program that was launched under Measure C, the Marin Wildfire Protection Authority. We and the district have 2.5 full-time employees, so basically 100 hours a week worth of inspectors coming out, visiting people's property and giving advice on how to improve conditions to protect your home. And if you do it and your neighbors do it, in conjunction, it really does create a good buffer against wildfire. And I'm sure the insurance companies will recognize the work.
Maybe.
Is there a place to see the map of the city fire breaks?
Alan, I'll leave that one to you. I'm not sure.
Don't know on that one. I can have contact our fire chiefs and share any resources that we have. Not the breaks. I know we have evacuation and fire hazard evacuation zones identified, but not necessarily where the fuel breaks are.
Okay, great. What is the status with the RFQ for the operations of the golf course and the clubhouse?
Oh, I definitely know Alan can answer that because he was working on it yesterday.
Yeah. So we had 5 respondents to the request for proposals. We narrowed it initially down to 3, all 3 of which had local ties, local connections, and weren't too big for Mill Valley, meaning that we didn't want a company where we felt we'd get lost in their portfolio. So we selected 3 potential operators that run between 30 and 40 golf courses. We thought that would be the appropriate fit. We've now narrowed our discussions down to two of those firms. We met with one of them yesterday. We have an appointment with the other firm coming up in 2 weeks. It's my hope that we can deliver a recommendation to council before year's end.
Okay.
Just and to finish that off, all the companies are strictly interested in the pro shop and the golf course operations. Nobody's really interested in tackling the clubhouse as a piece of that operations at this time. It's just we got to do a little work and improvement to the clubhouse to make it fiscally interesting to an operator.
Well, does that mean the city would still maintain the rental and upkeep on it?
Of course, yep.
Okay, okay. And somebody's asking, what is Nixie?
Nixle.
Nixle.
So Nixle is an opt-in emergency system that you could subscribe to. You literally go to nixle.com and register. And if you put in your zip code, you will get emergency notifications that come out typically from our police or fire department or Marin OES, Office of Emergency Services, but it's opt-in. It's Nixle itself is not an override into everybody's cell phones like some programs. So we do encourage everybody to go to Nixle and opt in for your emergency alerts.
Okay, and earlier, Ellen, you were talking about the match program, and someone's asking, can the homeowner charge rent, and who vets the applicants, homeowners, etc.?
Yeah, the homeowners certainly charge rent, and the home match organization has the skill sets to vet potential tenants and has the experience with the contracts and all that kind of stuff. So they serve as a go-between. They're kind of a matchmaker, essentially, between you as a homeowner. You know, say you're an elderly person and you could use a little help around the house, wouldn't mind somebody else being in the home, you know, but don't really have any sense of how to do that. And that's what this group does. That's what their service is. They're a not-for-profit group that basically has the skill set and the experience to bring people together. And they have an orientation towards trying to find workers in town.
Okay, and there is a question you're going to love. What is the status of the Great Miller Wall project?
I guess I'll throw that one to Alan.
Yeah, timing couldn't be better. I just talked to our director of building and planning this morning about that project. So apparently there was an issue between the developer and their previous contractor, and they're shopping for a new contractor right now. So the permits are good. Progress was underway, but I don't know the internals, but what we've been told is the developer's waiting on a new contractor to take over the project. Permits are good through 2023. After that, they would face penalties if the project is not substantially underway or completed.
Okay, there's a couple of questions that are both questions and suggestions. One participant is asking the new build out curbs. Can they be painted with reflective paint so they can be seen at night, especially in areas that are not well lit?
I'll take that as a suggestion and share it with our Director of Public Works.
Okay, and another participant said that if you're heading into town on Miller, that turning right on Camino Alto is really treacherous and wants to know if there's a way to put an arrow to allow better traffic flow.
So there is a traffic safety committee that internally handles these requests. You can imagine that if we responded to every single request that everyone had a suggestion over, we'd have 5,000 stop signs in town. So these are the people with the skill sets to understand, you know, the implications of making changes. So we can pass that comment on specifically to Andy Poster and his team. There's 4 or 5 people that are on this team.
Okay, another question which we probably a lot of us are wondering, they've closed down the Bank of America building right downtown. Do you guys know the status and what's it going to be converted to?
So it's private property. It's not our property. There is a community vitality committee of the Chamber of Commerce. Myself, Urban Carmel, and Alan, we get together pretty regularly to talk about things. The chamber would be interested in helping find a tenant for that facility, but again, I understand the building is for sale. So,
Okay. A little hot one. We know that you're considering the #1 Hamilton project, and as it moves to the next phase, is the city continuing to explore additional potential affordable housing opportunities such as the commuter lot on Miller?
so the first priority, you can either like try to do 8 things at once and not do any of them, or you can try to take one to conclusion and at the same time have other items in the on-deck circle. That commuter lot is complicated. It's on a flood zone, a floodplain. Another location that we've been interested in is the water tower, which is up in the hills, and that's not as attractive a location from the perspective of closeness to transit, but it's a very large piece of property and something might come from that also. So as the Housing Advisory Committee moves forward, it will be looking at all sorts of other opportunities, but the one that's on the front burner right now is Hamilton.
Okay, and another question, and I've forgotten which one of you were talking about the streets, the way they've been redesigned downtown, and wondered, is there a timeline that will become permanent?
Well, right now we're just assessing the public's reaction to it, right? And whether it works well. And once we have that assessment, both from the commercial community and from the residential community, and we look at it in hindsight after having done this short-term process, then it'll be brought forward for further consideration at a future council meeting, most likely. So no specific timeline, but it was designed to be a short-term thing that we're going to do over the summer before things get too crazy with everyone back in school and the like, and see how it works.
Okay, let me see this. Another affordable housing question. Any thought about taking the Miller Avenue with the elephant pattern concrete retaining wall and using that well-positioned site to satisfy the required affordable housing needs?
It's private property. It's not our property, but it's private property. It's currently zoned for 9 units. And as Alan said, there's a timeline for them to complete that. If they don't complete it, then they'll lose that right and everything starts over again. But I would also note that development was approved before the city made a number of very significant changes, which are designed to make development of affordable housing more predictable. And specifically, we did a couple of things. One, we put in a requirement that for every 4 units of property that you build, one of those should be a low-income unit. It's called an infill requirement of 25%. That was vetted through a series of architects and urban planners, and indicated that would not be an impediment to doing development, because this was not put in place to stop development. It was basically put in place so that if we did do development, that there would be a low-income piece associated with it. That's one thing we did. Another thing we did was a very significant effort. At the time that project was put in place, it was done through what's called the conditional use permit. So there were no baseline rules in place. And as a result of that, there were many, many public hearings and a lot of push and pull on that to create more predictability to development. The city has passed some design review guidelines for multi-use housing. So it's kind of like a baseline set of rules. This is our baseline ideas so that any developer would know, roughly what the city is looking for. There's some state laws that were recently passed, and anything that is within those guidelines, which is not precisely measurable, needs to be moved into a precisely measurable way or reworking. So the city is working on that right now. Another important thing to understand about Miller Avenue also is that most there's only two ways to develop low-income housing. One way is to get funds. Like what happens in Hamilton is that a not-for-profit developer goes out and gets what's called low-income housing tax credits. And basically it's federal money that finances the creation of the building. And then that allows, after the building has been built, for the operator to charge a much lower rent to the tenants than would be a market rent. And that lower rent basically is used to maintain the building over time, put new roofs on it, keep it painted, keep it looking good. And the good developers have a very solid track record of doing this kind of work, right? So that's one way to create low-income housing. The other way is, like we said, with this infill idea that, you build 4 units, you have to include one, and then they're just sold into the market, and that's the end of the story. If you look at Miller, most of the properties along Miller are small in size, acre and a half. They don't really, there's no land big enough to support the technique that was being used on One Hamilton. So that's why we have kind of both toolkits out there. But we're continuing as the housing element process is just kicking off. We just literally had our first meeting. The task before the housing committee is to make sure that there are no impediments in our zoning which would prevent development of the scale that the regional housing needs allocation employs. So there'll be a bunch more public meetings, and people are welcome to attend those and bring their ideas to those meetings as the housing element is written.
So there are a few more questions. However, it is 2 o'clock. We did promise to try to honor our timeline. So I want to personally thank both of you. There were over 85 people that were participating today, listening to your questions and answers, and hearing about all that's going on in the city. So thank you. The OAC thanks you. I know you guys really honor doing this for us every year to serve the community, and I personally am very grateful for that. And if those of you that are participating, we'd like to remind you that we have ongoing programs. The next one I want to tell you about will be on October 28th, again at 1, and it's the Mental Health and COVID-19 Pandemic, A Tale of Two Marins. And Dr. Elizabeth Horvitz, Chief of Behavioral Health Officer at Marin Community Clinics, will discuss how the intersection of income inequality, health disparities, and the COVID-19 pandemic has created a disproportionate toll on the mental health of Marin's Latinx immigrant community. We hope to see you there. And thank you all for participating.